Hello, everyone. I am Allison Mackley, one of the professional learning leaders for the ISTE Librarians Network and your host for tonight's webinar. Thanks so much for joining us for our podcasting in the library, featuring Nita Foster, Ingrid Hansen, Laurie Quintana, and we also have Jennifer Casa Todd joining in with us. Unfortunately, Carla was not able to make it this evening. The ISTE Librarians Network is proud to be hosting this free webinar. Our mission is to promote librarians as leaders and champions of educational technology and digital literacy. Our key mission is to provide a professional learning community where librarians can leverage technology, knowledge, and expertise to improve school library programs, increase access to information, and foster strong teaching and learning environments in a connected world. Podcasting allows students a vehicle to share not only what they think, but what they've learned and how they're applying it. In this webinar, we'll look at the ways that our panelists have used podcasting to help students find their voice and explore different ways to podcast, how to get started, and possible directions to consider when choosing podcasting as a method of supporting student voice and learning. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, but just very briefly, Nita Foster is the librarian media specialist at Alltrey Middle School in Kennesaw, Georgia. Ingrid Hansen is the library media specialist at Lindsay 6th Grade Academy in Mableton, Georgia. Laurie Quintana is a school library media specialist at Griffin Middle School in Smyrna, Georgia, for the Cobb County School District. And Jen Casatad, I'm going to have her introduce herself as part of our ISTE librarian leadership team. Now, we will be taking questions and comments via Twitter using the hashtag ISTELib. Heather Lister, the president of the ISTELib network, is going to be on there following along, and probably one of our other colleagues, Lynn is going to be there, and we're going to do our best to answer all of your questions. You can also chat with us via the YouTube live chat, and we promise to pay attention to the ISTE tag this week for questions and comments that you have. So again, thanks for joining us, and I am going to turn this over to the panelists.
Thank you so much, Allison. And I will start. I'm Jennifer Casa-Todd. I'm a teacher librarian in Ontario, Canada. I am on the professional learning board with ISTE. Really enjoying my time with these amazing people doing some really good work and providing some of this free PD. I have been in my role for just under 4 years. Before that, I was a literacy consultant at the district for 6 years, and I'm also the author of a book called Social Media, and excited to be here.
Hi, I am Ingrid Hansen. I'm the library media specialist at Linley 6th Grade Academy. I just recently moved to Linley this year. Prior to that, I was a library media specialist at Campbell Middle School in Smyrna, Georgia. I am a job changer, with 15 years experience in pharmaceutical and insurance sales. I entered this profession to be a librarian because of my love of children, literacy, and a passion for discovering ways that I can combine them both. I'm currently a member of the Cobb Media Leaders Team, my school leadership team, and the Linley 6th Grade Academy Literacy Committee. When I'm not busy at school supporting literacy, I'm actively involved with my 2 amazing daughters and our podcast group, Overdue Conversations from the Library, and thinking up better ways to help children discover a love of reading.
Hi, my name is Nita Foster, and I'm the media specialist at Alltrey Middle School in Kennesaw, Georgia. And I have been in education for 25 years, and the last 14 years have been in Georgia. I have had many roles throughout my educational experience. I started in the classroom as a kindergarten, 1st grade teacher. Then I moved to the computer lab and taught computer lab to K-5. And then we moved to Georgia, and I accepted a position at the Georgia Department of Education as a technology specialist in the Division of School Improvement. And then I came to Cobb County as a technology integration specialist and was assigned 7 different schools that I supported. And then 10 years ago, my life changed so much for the better, and I got the job of my dreams as the librarian at Autry Middle School. It is truly the best job in the world. I'm active on multiple committees, Guiding Coalition, School Foundation. I support my readers and my students. One of my favorite things that I do is I collaborate weekly with my teachers through our, we call them CCC meetings, but they're collaborative meetings and during their planning time to help them come up with resources and lessons that I either help create, help teach, things like that. And then in June last year, we started overdue conversations from the library. And recently, I started podcasting with my students. Oh, and I have a 17-year-old son.
Okay, well, hi, everyone. I'm Laurie Quintana, and this is my 4th year at Griffin Middle School in Smyrna, Georgia. And I, like Ingrid, am a career changer and moved from Michigan to Georgia about 6 years ago to start my path as an educator in the school environment. My prior experience is in human resources. And so I worked for education in Michigan, but from the administrative offices, doing bargaining and employee relations kinds of things. And so as my husband and I, we both actually are career changers. He's a teacher now as well. We decided we wanted to move south and do what we really loved. And that was to work with the kids and everything. I wanted to switch sides kind of. And so we did that. And I started out as the media para at Griffin Middle School and then did that for a year. And my principal offered me the position a year later when the library media specialist position opened. And so, again, I've been there for 4 years. I also serve on our school's leadership team. And I'm completing my education specialist degree at University of West Georgia. And then in June, I plan to start the Tier 1 leadership certification because I really enjoy the leadership aspect of being a school librarian and doing school-wide improvements and stuff at my school. So I started the podcasting because Ingrid and Anita invited me. And so I was real excited. I had always wanted to learn how to do podcasting. And so it's been a great experience being on their team with them.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our first question. So tell us how you incorporate student podcasting at your school. Just a little background to help us give an idea of what it looks like.
Want me to go first, or does it matter which order we're going?
Jump in and we'll just make this a conversation.
Okay, so, well, after doing the podcasting with Anita and Ingrid for Overdue, I really wanted to step in and use those skills to help students. Our district and our ELA department really supports the reading, writing, thinking, speaking. And so I'm always looking for ways that I can incorporate and support that for our students. And podcasting, I felt, was a great tool for them to use. A lot of times in their classes, they go, when they're looking for technology to do a presentation and share information, they're going to the normal, PowerPoint and stuff. And so I felt like the podcasting and them learning how to podcast would give them another avenue for sharing their voice, because I am a very big advocate for student voice as well. And so I decided to start the student podcast club. And this is my first year doing it. I was also inspired by Anita because she kind of did some podcasting with her students as well. And so I started that at the beginning of the school year, and I kind of just put out an application process and had quite a bit of interest. And we've been going since August of last year, and we meet every Friday. We in the mornings, and we meet for an hour in the morning, and we use that time. Basically, the first semester has been all about them learning what podcasting is, the terminology about copyright, finding their tone and their voice, and getting comfortable recording themselves. And so they're amazing now. Now they're taking off, and the way I incorporate podcasting with them is the need for us to communicate. I'm the communications person at our school. So I do all social media, the website, the newsletter, everything. And we have morning announcements, but because it's closed circuit, our stakeholders aren't getting all the information about our school. And so now they podcast every Friday, the morning announcements for the week. And then I put that in the school newsletter and on our Weebly website, and then out on our Twitter at Griffin Podcasts.
I'll go next. So I just started. I'm also getting my specialist degree. I'm getting mine through KSU in instructional technology. And I really wanted to start podcasting with my students in the fall, but I had this thing I had to do that I had committed to doing for my classes to do Genius Hour. And so I had to do that in the fall. So I did not get to start podcasting with my students until January. But we have a block of time called Viking Time, and it's 30 minutes every day. And Tuesdays and Thursdays are set aside for enrichment. So we use that time, and students used to be there. So that's really good because they're not forced to be there. So they're actively participating. And so I have about 10 students that are doing it. And we actually, we published one of our first podcasts today. I use the NPR's lesson plans that they have set out on their website, and I tweaked them because of the limited time that we have in class, and had them to work for me. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later in the webinar. But yeah, we've done really good with it. The students are very eager. They were very excited, even for the student who, even though not all 10 published theirs today, but they were excited for the one student who did today. So that was really good. And it's giving them their voice and a great learning experience. And some of them, I have them write a script, and some of them, I have them at least do bullet points, but I have to listen to them, and we'll talk about that later on. But they're very eager and very excited about it, and our administration is also very excited about it.
These also sound so good. So I'll jump in next. So I have dabbled in podcasting myself. I have a podcast called Social Media, the podcast where I interview students. So I've always been really interested in amplifying student voice. And I know that podcasting really is becoming more popular with our kids. So for, I guess, 2 years ago, I worked alongside an English teacher who wanted to create podcasts for her kids. And then just this past year, just this past semester, I worked with 3 English teachers, and it was an embedded part of their curriculum. So the students were creating personal stories, and we thought, what better way than to have them record their personal stories on audio. And so we just finished that, and we're looking at what tweaks we would like to make, and we're getting feedback from kids. They really enjoy it, but I find I work with high schoolers. They hate the sound of their voice. So they really enjoyed how different it was for them to work on. We use GarageBand. We're going to talk a little bit more about that too, but they, for the most part, really, really enjoyed it. And then I think the authentic audience piece is one that both intimidates high school students, but is also really cool. So many of them, we gave them the choice as to whether or not they wanted their podcasts to be live. And many of them said that they didn't. And that might just be because they had never done anything like that before. So that is something that I'm going to work on together with our teachers, maybe doing a little bit more front loading about how having an authentic voice through podcasting is a positive or negative thing, maybe at the beginning. But that's what we've done. I co-plan, co-teach, and co-assess in an English curriculum.
Much like Jen, I also started off by collaborating with an ELA teacher who came to me and said that she was interested in podcasting. And we created a year-long class. So I got them once a week for an hour. And we started, I actually found a set of lessons from the New York Times about student podcasting, which I altered to make it more appropriate for middle school. And so we spent a year learning about different elements of podcasting and what that looked like. They actually had a rubric. They recorded 7 podcasts in a series, each one implementing a different element that they had learned about, and ended up actually applying to the NPR Student Podcast Contest, where they received an honorable mention out of 6,000 submissions. So I was super proud of them. And this year, with my move to Lindley, I just started podcasting with students again. I have a group during our enrichment Wednesday that I meet with once a week for an hour and 10 minutes. And so we've just recently started talking about podcasting and the elements and some of the technical issues, but I'm looking forward to actually having them record within the next week or two.
Fantastic. Thank you. Such varied experiences, and I love to hear about the collaboration also. So our next question is, how do you fund podcasting at your school?
I'll go first on this one. It's free.
I'll go first.
It's absolutely free. We use the Anchor app, which does not cost anything. We're going to use iPads, but somebody else checked them out today. So we used my phone with the Anchor app on it. So it's completely free. And let me just tell you the story. When the 3 of us started podcasting, we were trying every mic that Laurie had in her space. We spent hours and we recorded a 10-minute podcast multiple times. And we were never quite happy with the sound. Various different microphones that cost a lot of money. And at the end of the day, I just said, hey, I just went to this thing and they were telling us about this Anchor app. Let me download it and try it. And we ended up trying it, and it had the best audio. Now, we have encountered some issues, especially when we remote record, but you're not going to do that in the school. You're going to just use it with your students. So it's great. We do not make any money from Anchor. It's completely free, and it's a great tool. You can edit in there. You can add music in there. It has royalty-free music that you can use, everything. So I highly recommend Anchor because it's free.
I mean, on that note, I actually wrote a grant to get all of the equipment. I bought the mics, the headphones, the stands, all of the things. And that's what we used to record our first podcast together. And we found out that that's not necessary. So like Anita said, you just really need the Anchor app and device to get started. And so I'm very thankful for the grant I received. I wrote it through our local Smyrna Foundation, who supports students learning new technology and everything. And so the kids still, they play with it, and they still put the headphones on when they're recording. And I cleaned out a closet in my library and created a podcasting studio. So they have their own studio, and I purchased an on the air sign, a neon sign for the window, and they go in and turn that on, and there's a window. So any students in the library can watch them and see what they're doing in their recording. And so I kind of set them up like DJ style, I guess you could say, with all of their equipment. And so they have their own studio.
Wow, that's really cool. We have a couple questions over in the chat. So the first question is, how old were your students using the Anchor app? And do you run into student data privacy issues?
We're all in the middle school. I mean, I have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Actually, yeah, I have all 3 grade levels in my podcast club. And so they've picked it up really well. I mean, again, at the beginning of the school year, the first semester doing this, you have to go over all of that information with them and teach them about privacy and copyright and all of those elements that go with the podcasting. One of the reasons I love podcasting and why I was a big supporter of starting this is because a lot of our students, I know, Jen, you talked about them not liking to hear their voice and stuff. I'm actually the same way when I do our podcast because I don't like to listen to myself, but they also don't like to be on camera. And so podcasting gives them the opportunity to get their voice out there without being seen. And that's part of our closed circuit with our morning announcements, we aren't allowed to put the students' photos out there and their names. And so they use their pseudonyms in their podcasts. And typically it's their first initial, last initial. But we went over all of that with them when we got started.
I actually, I did it differently. I funded podcasting in my school with my book fair money. I found a desktop computer in the back of a cabinet, and I absconded with it and put it in a little room that I had. And I bought a boom mic and some headset and a stand and put them to work. We used Audacity because it was approved software within the county, and it gave them the opportunity to learn how to edit that very precisely. And that was very effective. In regards to talking about privacy issues, I had all of my students sign our county media release form prior to getting started. And then in addition, I had concerns because my students introduced themselves and said what school they were from. And I had personal concerns about posting that. So what we ended up doing is that I created a OneNote, and that's where their podcast landed. And then I invited their parents as well so that they could come in and listen. But we didn't actually post anything online. It was a private venture, I guess.
And I guess oh, sorry, Laurie.
No, I was just going to add that I also give, at the beginning of the year, I gave parents a information packet and explained to them what podcasting was all about with the terminology and everything as well. And so they signed off for their students to be able to do the podcasting.
Awesome. Okay, so two things. I added Grayson McKinney and Zach Rondot, who I interviewed actually for the Social Leader podcast, and they podcast with kids as young as grade 4 and 5, also with permission, and they use Anchor for that. At our school, we do something different, and we haven't used Anchor yet. And I don't know that I will. What we have iPads that are very underutilized. And so I had been using GarageBand in iPad for many, many years. We had done a really cool poetry mashup with it, and I loved the tracks. I loved the music. It was very easy. And we don't have one-to-one devices at my school. So I knew that many students would have their own iPhones, their own devices. So we opted, after talking to the teachers and co-planning, we opted to go with GarageBand. So for the most part, the students used GarageBand for their actual podcasts. And then they shared the link with the teacher. And then in a Google form, we asked them to share the link and asked them whether or not they wanted to share it publicly. And then those podcasts that the kids wanted to share went through the library. I haven't uploaded them yet because we just have done this, but they are going to be posted on the library website. So they'll be public in that way, but we have gone through it. And you could use any Google site, really, if you're a Google Apps for Education school, to post those links. You can also, when you download on GarageBand, when you download the podcasts, or rather share them or export them, they'll just show up with a thumbnail that says GarageBand. So you could even put them on your YouTube channel, which I've done in the past as well. So they're on my YouTube channel, but as podcasts.
Okay.
Not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we crossed over a little bit into question 4. So I put that up on the screen. So what kinds of recording activities do the students do in podcasts? Anita, your mic is muted.
Sorry. I was just going to say that I have my students on the last question. They are allowed to say their first name, and that's all. And then again, we have them sign the waiver for our Cobb County thing. But I also want to point out that this is a great way to teach digital citizenship, because I strongly went over with my students that you don't want to say something and it be out there for people to hear if you're not going to mean it. And you don't want to say something that will misrepresent you in 5-10 years down the road, or misrepresent the school in some way. So we had, a little bit of digital citizenship in one of my lessons for this. I guess I'll go first since my mic's on. What kind of recording activities do you do? Well, I let the students choose their topics. We have a wide range. Like the one that was just posted today was on the power of positivity, and a subtext of not to bully people. And then I have some on unsolved mysteries and unsolved murders. I have some girls that like that sort of stuff. And then I have some boys who want to do like the top 10 video games and top 10 music videos and things like that. I asked them to, instead of doing top 10, to put them into categories. So top 10 certain types of video games or top 10 certain genres of music. So that it could be more of a series if that's what they were leaning towards. But I have my students, they pick their topic and I have to approve it. Then they do the research and I give them a graphic organizer for writing everything out that they find. And then they have to write either a bullet list or a script for it. And then they come and I read it and, okay, let's look at this. Let's change this. What do you think about this type of editing I help them with? I don't change too much on there. I'm trying because this is their voice and I want to have them to have their own voice, but I do help them along the way. And then they record it, they edit it, but I publish it. So I make sure that I have the last say in what actually gets published out there. So that's what we do.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess I've already touched on mine. And this year it was the personal narrative. That was just very intentional because the teachers, I think it's so tricky sometimes as a teacher librarian when you're working alongside a teacher because you want them to try something new and have their kids have the experience of trying something new. But you also have to be really careful. It's like that balancing act, right? So you have to be careful to honor sort of what they've done and what they want to do. So it worked out really well in that for this particular assignment, the kids had to create a narrative of almost a turning point in their lives. So it was a story, and so it worked really well with being able to incorporate different narrative techniques and voices and the different layers and songs in GarageBand. So that's what we did now, and I'm hoping to expand it. I love some of the ideas that were shared today. I love. I want to go there with my kids, but I think starting small and being okay with, just trying this different mode has worked for me.
So I do the news broadcasting, like I talked about, or the kids do. I do. They do that every Friday, but I found that they struggle a little bit with finding their own topics, and so I created a topic jar, and they can go to the jar and just randomly pull out a topic from the jar, and then they go and record on it because they really love to do randoms. They call it randoms all the time, and they'll pick up a pop culture thing and start talking about it, but then they go off on these side conversations and then they come back and then they go back, and it's very fun and everything, and they do great and stuff. But I was trying to teach them how to stay on the topic so that when they when we publish it, your audience, you think about your audience and who's going to be listening, and if they choose to listen to your topic but then start listening to the recording and you guys aren't talking about that, you just really have to be considerate of your audience. So we've talked a little bit about that as well. And then I've done some enrichment activities as well. And so especially with milestones coming up, the students who don't need the remediation, I've taken them and taught them about podcasting and did projects with them in that way to let them experience it as well, because I want to open it up to the whole school and all students. I have my podcast club, but I want, other students to be able to experience it as well. And then coming up soon here, I have a social studies teacher who does the MICVA soapbox challenge. And so her students just completed those, and they do a 2-minute speech on a topic that they're very passionate about. It has to be research-based. And so we're going to work together to get those students to record their speeches on the podcasting so we can get them out there as well, and want our stakeholders to, be able to experience the work that the kids are doing and to hear their voice and what they're passionate about.
My kids actually, because it was last year it was a year-long series, so their topic had to be something that they could talk about in 7 podcasts, with the final podcast being 30 minutes in length. So their topics had to be selected carefully. So some of the requirements that the teacher I collaborated with and I came up with is that it needed to be something that affected them and their peer group and their community. And were they what was their purpose? Were they drawing awareness? Were they creating solutions? Were they doing both? But what was that going to look like? And so we really encouraged them to look at the broader picture instead of just viewing each podcast individually. Having said that, they absolutely had to script it, and they had to come forward and share it with me or the other teacher before they were able to start recording. And again, each one was designed to incorporate a different type of element for podcasting. So for example, we did Vox Pop. So they had to have an podcast that included that. They had to have one that did storytelling, one that incorporated a voiceover. So there were different elements that they had to include each time. This year, I am again limiting their choices to a certain degree. They're in 6th grade. And so there's one kid will come up with an idea and they're like, all pile on. They're like, I love that. I'm going to do that too. I'm like, listen, y'all, we just need to broaden out a bit. So I'm doing this with a book club that I've been working on for remediation. And so now they're choosing a character and they're podcasting out about that character and how they related to that character.
Thanks. And you did a perfect job of transitioning into our next question. How did you introduce podcasting to your students?
I can go next. So again, working with English teachers, their main goal and point was the narrative story. And the podcast was just the vehicle for sharing that story. So we didn't know for sure, we didn't want to take for granted that the kids really understood how podcasting worked. So we got them into groups and had them listen to a variety of podcasts that I had found. And we asked them what the characteristics of the podcasts were, who the audience and what the purpose and the audience of the podcast was, what techniques were used by the podcast. And then they had to turn and talk in their group and determine what makes an effective podcast. And so we came together as a group and we co-constructed what makes an effective podcast for our own purposes. And once we did that, then I was able to teach them the tool, and they were able to then record. But all of that pre-teaching, the writing of the story, happened first before we introduced the tech. Because what we didn't want is for the kids to just because they love it. It's fun, right? So we didn't want them to just get distracted by the tech. We wanted to make sure that their story was something that they were proud of and they wanted to share. Then we added this is what a podcast is and what it does. How would you change it from a short story to now a podcast script? How might you divide up? So we gave them a storyboard. How will you divide up what you're going to say? Where might you include musical elements? How will you introduce it? What are your transitions going to look like? And spent quite a bit of time on the storyboard. And then they got to play. And I think that's really important too. We sometimes don't do that enough. Not everyone, there are so many kids said to me, Miss, I have GarageBand on my phone and I have never used this before. So for us, once we did that sort of front loading of what a podcast is, we said, okay, you're not going to touch your script at all right now. You are just going to play. You're going to create a couple of tracks. You're going to see how things work. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to start again. You're going to share it. You're going to delete it. You're going to, do what you need to do. And so we gave them a good 30 minutes. And that's the way it worked for us. And it worked really well, I think.
I think that you touched on some really important things, that a lot of what I think makes a successful podcast with students is the before work and explaining all the things that you were talking about and focusing on who your audience is and what does that look like, and being able to really have a clear understanding of what they're doing before they get started. I'm so glad you mentioned it. I meant to, but I forgot. So, yeah.
So I introduced them. I made a presentation and talked about what podcast was. And I also had some clips in there. My group was so small that they didn't do it in groups. We did it as a whole class because there were only like 10 or 12 students there at the time. And like I said, we meet just twice a week for 30 minutes. So my time is limited when I have them. The next session after I introduced what a podcast is and let them listen to about 3 podcasts, one of them being our podcast, ladies. And I then the next week we brainstormed different topics and ideas, and I had 5 different poster boards around the room, and I gave them like 3 minutes, them and a partner at each of the poster boards, to write as many ideas under that topic: historical events, people who changed the world. And so we had just 5 different categories around the room, and I let them put Post-it notes up on it so that they could. And here's one thing I did do. I color coded the Post-it notes, and I gave a group one color so that I knew at a Post-it board where the students were and how involved they were in that general topic. Because if my 2 boys did not have something up on something, I'd walk over to them and I'd go, yeah, what's the struggle here? Here, let's help them think of some things that they could brainstorm that could go up there. And so that was a really good thing. And then the next week I had them sit down and think about what topics they would want to. Most of mine broke up into groups of 2. Except for I have one group of 3 and one girl who wanted to do her own. And she's the rock star one who published today. So, but I agree, you have to lay that foundation down there first, have them write it, have them edit it, have them research it. That's the main thing I said to them is, you may think you know everything about this topic because it's your passion, but unless you research it, you really don't know everything. I want you to know pros and cons to it. And going back to one of our previous questions, because I was thinking about it as everybody else was talking, how else you can use this. All of my language arts teachers right now, 6th, 7th, and 8th, are all doing research, and most of them are doing argumentative research. A podcast is a great tool to say, okay, now you have your essay that you wrote for your teacher. Now let's turn that into a podcast. So there's another idea there.
We do have a question that came up in the chat. Are there any recommendations for podcasts to use as a model with students?
I use the NPR. They have the lesson plans already done for teachers, and they had several recommendations. So I used 3 of theirs for recommendations, and we just listened to a couple minutes of them because of our limited time. And then I put my 3 favorites on there: How Stuff Works, our podcast, and there was another one, and I can't remember what it was right now. But so I had 6 of them that we listened to. So I think you should make it personal, and if they're school appropriate, put on there your favorite as well. So use others, but also, okay, but these are the ones that I listen to, so that they know that you're, actually listening to them.
Mm-hmm. One of the podcasts that I love is 99% Invisible. And I think kids would find that fascinating too, if you want to check out some of those episodes.
Oh, I think we need to crowdsource this. I was going to say, I was frantically trying to find mine, but I'm on the ISTLib account, so I can't find it, but I will definitely use the hashtag ISTLib to share mine. But I also ask students, and if we're trying to amplify student voice, my first question was, when we talked about what makes an effective podcast, and even before, is what's your favorite podcast? And can we listen to it? And does it have the same, would you say that it has the same criteria that we just established? And then they really feel like their voice is heard. Now, again, I teach high school, and their favorite podcasts were explicit, so we couldn't use them. But I think just knowing which of your kids already have some experience with podcasting and have a favorite, you never know until you ask that question.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Okay. Thank you for that.
For me, because I was a beginner podcaster myself, I didn't really have a list of things to refer to, but I talk a lot about what we do in our podcast with Overdue. But I did send out a link, and I was looking this up right here. There was one on HuffPost for here are the 25 best podcasts for kids. And so we have a remind that I use with them to remind them about our weekly podcasting club meetings and any other information that they need to do to prepare for before they get there. And so I shared the link in that. I'm not sure how I can do that on here.
Mhm.
There's a lot of really great ones. And so they had homework assignment, pick one of those and then listen to it. And when you come back to the podcast club the following week, then you would share what you listened to and if it inspired you, what did you know what I mean? How was the tone? That kind of thing, all the different things, the components of podcasting.
Okay. Thank you.
So I can read some of them off if you would like.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Go right ahead.
There's one, this is from NPR called All Songs Considered, Brains On. There's one that's called But Why, Noodle Loaf, Smash Boom Best, Stories Podcast, This American Life, The Past, The Curious, and one's called Tumble. So it has quite a few.
I think too, again, mindful of the role of teacher librarian as co-planner and co-teacher, that was one of the things that I said to my teachers. I will take this on, and then I gave them, my top 6, right? My favorites, and invited them. So because some of these 25 lists I found overwhelming, and I thought, I don't want to overwhelm my teachers. I want to make sure that I'm giving them sort of I gave them a link and I gave them an overview. And then I said, which of these do you think might work given your students? Because they know their students better than we do too. So I just wanted to point that out. I think that's really, really important that teachers see us as a support for them. And this is just another example of how we can be.
That is very true. I just popped in the over in the chat some of my favorites. So Happier with Gretchen Rubin, Code Switch, NPR 99% Invisible, I popped in there for you, and then also the NPR Pop Culture Happy Hour. So you do have to make sure that you take a you take a look and listen to them first to make sure that they are student appropriate, grade level appropriate. But yeah, it's a great idea to crowdsource some of these so we can all experience what some other people have to do. And we're going to look for Jen to tweet out her list too. So I think that we already covered what equipment and technology do you use with your students. Is there any remark, Jen, you have a comment about that?
Yes, I'm so excited. So I will continue to use GarageBand. I think it's awesome. I really, we have the iPads, they're not used. But I was at the Library Super Conference in Ontario, which, it's awesome. But there is a gentleman named Stephen Hurley who does really great work with Voice Ed Radio. And he had this really very cool mixer and these microphones. I think he said it was about $2,500. That's Canadian, so that's way cheaper for you American friends. And it was called Rodecaster. I'm going to put a link, again, I'm going to tweet a link. It's called Rodecaster Post-Production Studio. And it just looked easy. It looked very high tech. Like the one thing I think would be so great for not a lot of money, kids could really feel like they were in a radio, like at a radio show, So I'm looking to get parent council possibly to fund this and add that. We have just a room that I'd like to turn into a podcasting studio in the library and have that as part of it. So I just want to share that because I was remiss in talking about.
Hey, Jen, we just had an interview with one of our colleagues who he created a recording studio in his makerspace. He was also featured in School Library Journal's magazine for this. And we went and interviewed him and several of the students. And you could easily take and have that as a multi-purpose recording area for podcasting and for music and for mixing beats. And there were some students in there that just wanted the beats. And he said, and then some students that come in and focus on the lyrics. So yeah, that's one of my goals, is to create like a podcasting recording studio in our school for our students in middle school.
I love that. I was going to add the green screen to it in there, but it really makes sense to add those elements too. And maybe you need to share the link to that with our friends at ISTLib as well, so we could all listen to it.
We sure will. And you can find us on Twitter at Overdue Lib Talk. And you have to be careful when you're searching for our podcast, because there's another Overdue, and theirs looks a little bit like ours too. But we're Overdue Conversations from the Library, and we're in all of the major podcasting outlets through Anchor. It publishes them all for us.
Okay. Anita, if you could put that right in the chat if you're able to there, and then we'll make sure that we get to the correct one. Okay, our next question. What were your expectations for podcasting when you were first getting started, and maybe were those expectations realized, or are there things that you're still working on?
I can start, though I feel like I've been talking a lot. I was simply hoping for two things: to allow my teachers to experience yet another way for kids to demonstrate their learning. I feel like the more choice we can give kids, so now they could maybe demonstrate their learning in this way or in a podcast. I wanted my students to enjoy, to be creative, to use their voices and their creativity in the context of one of their classes. And I think I met both of those goals. I was hoping that more students would want to share with an authentic audience. And unfortunately, that's something that I have to work on, but that's okay. We have a couple, and you know what? You start with a couple and it hopefully keeps growing. So
my goals really, or my expectation, was that my students would feel empowered. We had focused their topics on things that they were passionate about and broke it down. And I really wanted them to feel like what they had to say mattered. And so my expectation was that they would leave feeling more empowered, more confident in being able to share their opinions and having facts to back that up.
I'll build on to Ingrid as well. I wanted to develop their confidence in their voice. And, there's a lot happening in our students' lives every day. And we have those discussions with them on a personal level. But I just really wanted them to be able to learn how to express that passion in a format that they were comfortable with. Like I said, where they don't have to be on a video and show their face. They can develop their own voice. A lot of students struggle getting up and doing presentations in class. I see it all the time when they're in the library. They don't want to be the first one to go up and present. And so I just really wanted students to have an opportunity to develop that confidence and be able to be strong getting up and talking about topics that they care about in front of everybody. The idea of doing the student announcements or morning announcements every week, I think we're finally on a schedule. So I'm glad for that. And I think I've narrowed it down to my team of students who are really good. And they come in on their lunch sometimes if they don't finish up during club. And they sit and eat their lunch in the studio, and they just hammer out those announcements now. I give them the slides from the morning announcements, and they take it and they're just running with it. And I'm so proud of that. Like, it's amazing to me. I don't even have to be in the studio with them. They just go and they fly with it. And then one other thing I want to start in, I'm working with my husband. He's a Spanish teacher at my school, is to bring in the diversity part of podcasting. And we're 60% Hispanic at my school. And I really want to give the Hispanic students a voice as well. And so starting tomorrow, I have a couple of his students coming in, and they're going to record some podcasts in Spanish. And so I'm very, very excited about that. I really want to instill some pride in our Hispanic students in our school. And so through the podcasting, I hope I'm able to fulfill that goal.
I wanted to give my students a voice, like everybody else has said. A lot of times, especially in middle school, they feel like they're not valued. And so I wanted to make sure that they knew that their voice is valued and that there are people listening. And the girl who published her podcast today, now I'm just going to tell you, we probably have like 5 followers. That's about it right now, because all I did at the beginning of the year was I set it up and I started reading the first chapter of a book and putting that out there to draw my students into reading, because I knew I could not start the podcasting yet. I think I have like 3 episodes of me reading the first chapter of a book, but I would like to continue that. It's just life's gotten busy and I haven't been able to do it. I'd really like for students to be able to do that and to come in and read the first chapter of a book. And but with us doing this, the girl who published today, she came in towards the end of the day and she went, "Ms. Foster, when is it going to be published?" And I went, "Baby, it already is. It's already out there." And so it's only a 2-minute podcast, but she did such a great job. She used her voice and inflected, and it was, you could tell that she's passionate about the topic that she spoke about. So that's really when I started. I wanted to give my students a voice that they knew somebody valued.
Thank you so much. And I love that the focus here is on student voices, because there are so many of those voices that we just don't get a chance to hear. I want to just mention also that, ironically, today on the Knowledge Quest, American Association of School Librarians Knowledge Quest, just had a post called Podcasting Taking the Plunge. It was written by Laura Long. So I just thought it was very timely since we were doing this podcast tonight. I don't know, maybe it was done purposefully, but I just popped that in the comments also. So what do you hope your students learn through podcasting?
Well, I mean, I want my students to learn the technical things behind podcasting. And while it's certainly easy, there are apps out there and there are things that you can do. It can be very simple, or it can be more challenging, I guess, and more detailed. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve. But I wanted my kids to feel comfortable with that. I wanted them to be able to have that pride that said, you know what, I know how to do this. I've been podcasting. I'm good at this. So I really hope that, again, that would be a confidence piece for them. It's so crucial in middle school. They just lack that confidence piece, it seems like, across the board. And then again, feeling that what they had to say mattered, and feeling pride in the fact that they were able to research topics and talk intelligently about them and use a vehicle that adults are using, that this wasn't a child-focused type of thing. This was something that was empowering them in the real world, that was being used by people of all ages and ethnicities and that kind of thing.
Okay, that was awesome. We could all go home now. That was
right. I agree.
It's absolutely right. So when I think of podcasting, I think of what you just said, Ingrid, right? The digital literacy skills that they are gaining in this, the digital citizenship skills. We talked about this already, right? This idea, I know with students, we had to talk about music. Like, why can't I just bring in music? And we had a really good conversation about fair use music, using their voices and amplifying their voices. I mean, there are just so many pluses. Whenever we can bring a real and authentic connection to the world into our classrooms, then we should. So,
yes, thank you very much for that. And we are going to move on to our last question for the evening. So our viewers may feel like they'd like to jump right in and give podcasting a try. What advice do you have for teacher librarians who would like to start podcasting in their libraries? If you can give them one piece of advice, maybe keep it to one sentence.
Go for it.
Nice.
Me? Okay. Well, I wrote my one sentence. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
An iPad or a device, download the Anchor app, recruit your students, and start recording. Just start. You have to start somewhere. And once you start, it's like it just takes off on its own and you become more confident.
Thank you.
I would say just much like what Laurie and Nita said, just start. And I told my kids the first time we did this, we're learning together. I'm not an expert in this, and we're figuring this out together, and we'll learn as we go. And we did. They loved it. So yeah, you should totally do this.
Great. Jen, you're going to get the last word.
How do I beat that? Again, I would say don't worry about the right equipment and don't worry about being perfect. Just know that there is a supportive group of other teacher librarians who have done this, who can help you and learn alongside your kids.
Wow, thank you. I would like to thank all of you, Ingrid, Anita, Laurie, Jen, for spending the past hour with us. The expertise that you have been able to share is just amazing, and I learned so much. It makes me want to jump in and try podcasting with my own students. I'm hoping that maybe over the next few days you can help us watch the hashtag ISTELib hashtag in case people who are watching this later are able to ask questions, and you can jump in, and any other resources that you're willing or able to share, you can just share with the ISTELib hashtag. We're so fortunate to have you here tonight, and thank you so much for taking your time to spend with us.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Okay, so the Anchor app, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that it is app driven. They do have a website, and you can see all of your data on the website from a computer, but any editing that you do or recording that you do has to be done through the app on a device.
Okay. Thank you so much. And we are now at the end of our hour.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Jen, so much for inviting us to do this. This was a fabulous experience for us. And being able to share our expertise is something that school librarians love to do, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for that opportunity. We love to share with everybody else and inspire other school librarians.
And you certainly have. I do want to put in a quick plug. We continue. We had a launch earlier in January. We have a book study happening with ISTELib, and we are reading Cornelius Miner's We Got This, and our Twitter chat for that book is happening. We have one happening on February 11th. So do continue to check out our Weebly and the hashtag ISTELib to find out what other professional learning opportunities that are available.
Fantastic. Thank you for that reminder. Have a wonderful night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank